Hello. My name's Barbara Ryan. I'm the chair of EMPA, and on behalf of EMPA, I welcome everyone here today. We have close to 100 registrations for this webinar, so we're really looking forward to a strong discussion from our speaker and our audience. And a big welcome to all the biosecurity communicators who are online today. They worked long and hard last year during the potential lumpy skin disease and foot and mouth disease outbreaks. We're coming to you today from the football final capital of Australia in Queensland. So we honour and respect the Turrbal and Jagera people who are the First Nations custodians of the land where we're coming to you from. We acknowledge and recognise the significance of our shared history, and we support the continued connections of First Nations people to country. All right, so today we talk to the Deputy Coordinator General of Australian National Emergency Management Agency, Joe Buffone, about the Joint Interagency Task Force Exotic Animal Diseases report. This was a review that into our ability to protect Australia from an exotic animal disease outbreak. The task force, with just 4 weeks to undertake its work, focused on activities that would use and build upon existing structures, expertise and plans. And the group also undertook structured crisis appreciation and planning, a series of scenario-based discussions, one-on-one and group engagements, and the desktop reviews of existing plans and reviews to consider the level of preparedness of our system to respond to exotic animal disease outbreaks. It found that exotic animal disease response arrangements are comprehensive and well understood by system participants. The task force emerged with 7 findings and 14 recommendations, and one finding and 1 recommendation centred on crisis communication, which actually, despite it being 1, is quite central to the report. Joe has more than 30 years' experience in security and disaster management and has held a number of key senior positions. These include Chief Officer of the Victorian Country Fire Authority, Deputy Emergency Management Commissioner Victoria, Deputy Emergency Services Commissioner Victoria. Joe has had direct involvement in coordinating and responding to major emergencies in Australia and internationally at the strategic, operational and tactical levels. So thank you for joining us, Joe. Can you give us some context for the setting up of the task force?
Morning, Barb, and good morning, participants. Could I also acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we collectively meet? I'm on Ngunnawal country, and Barb, I might actually challenge the football capital, but anyway, I'm a Victorian at heart, but also acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders that may be on this call as well. So, Barbara, just your question, can you just ask the question again?
Yeah, can you give us some context around the report, why we needed it and that type of thing?
Yeah, thanks, Barb. So I don't know how many of you are aware, but obviously foot and mouth disease and lumpy skin, is sort of quite prevalent in Indonesia and throughout the archipelago there. There's strong emphasis on prevention, and a lot of work had been done on prevention. But what my minister wanted to do was just to confirm that the actual arrangements in the country, should an incursion occur, was sound, and if not, what needed to be done to improve them. And the other key thing was because the biosecurity stream really operates in some ways independent of mainstream emergency management, and it was identified very, very early that should we have an incursion, the scale that would occur and the speed in which it would occur would actually need to have whole of government and use the emergency management frameworks to actually respond accordingly. And Barb, if I could just have the first slide up just quickly, which is the heuristic diagram, because I just want to put the context on the scale that we're talking about. But anyway, that's the heuristic diagram or heuristic model that we use around, how we operate at the national level. And just quickly, the y-axis talks about the capability and capacity that we have to manage risk and to respond. And then the x-axis talks about the severity. So day to day, the system operates on the left-hand side, but when we hit that centerpiece which is when the rules change, and then potentially we start to go into the severe, extreme and catastrophic ends of any crisis, then the demand outstrips the capability. And with foot and mouth or lumpy skin, because of the impacts in particular on the economy, then it goes literally from zero to catastrophic instantaneously. So that's why there was a focus on actually doing this work, validating the work that has been done in the biosecurity area, and then coming up with an approach and a system to connect it nationally into the mainstream emergency management system. So you can drop that slide off now. Thanks, Barb.
And I think the engagement process that you used for this report was really interesting. Can you describe how you sort of incorporated the ideas and opinions of all the stakeholders?
Yeah, thanks, Barb. It was a multi-pronged aspect. First of all, what we had to do was to manage the stakeholders that actually had responsibility in the biosecurity area. So when the task force was set up, so even at the start in setting up the task force, we made sure that we engaged with the right stakeholders and also incorporated them into the task force. So my co-lead, I led the task force, but I had a co-lead, Karen Crossway, absolutely, a critical part. And she was from Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forests, but had responsibility in biosecurity. Then obviously we had to establish the team. We had to engage with seniors in a range of different departments. That was just in setting up the task force. An ambitious time frame and ambitious outcomes when you think that 4 weeks from woe to go to actually do the work that we did was genuinely quite challenging, but also very, very rewarding. The next thing was to literally do a stakeholder map to make sure that we knew who were the critical stakeholders, who were the influencers, and who were the need to knows, so that we mapped that out very, very quickly. So what we did is had concurrent teams sort of doing exercise planning, stakeholder mapping. We actually started writing the report from day one. Now, when I say that, that's not preempting the report, but actually framing it, what areas had to be captured. And we used, as I said, crisis appreciation and strategic planning, which I'll show shortly, which was the foundation that we sort of drew, and it was an iterative process. The other thing is we ran significant webinars ourselves, including with farmer groups, with rural groups, with peak bodies. In actual fact, 1,900 different connections and engagements to make sure that occurred. The other thing is we actually went and interviewed peak bodies. So, examples are Northern Territory Cattle Association, Northern Territory Buffalo Association, the pork industry. We also met with Indigenous landowners because of feral animals that in particular up north. We also mapped the movement of stock. We engaged with the transport organisation. So pretty much anybody that had critical equity in movement of stock and handling of stock, we engaged with.
So that 4-week turnaround, it is really tight. How can you be confident that you've covered all the issues?
Yeah, really good question, Barb. So what we did is, as I said, we ran concurrent activity and we ramped up very, very quickly. So the task force was made up of 20 people that were literally handpicked and had very, very different tasks and different levels of expertise. So we had veterinarians, we had logisticians, we had exercise specialists, planning specialists, comms people. And what we did is, first of all, obviously we mapped out the plan of what we were going to do. So how we knew that we were covering off all the right areas is, first of all, through the engagement strategy. Second was through the exercises. We ran 3 national exercises in that time frame, including stock standstill, which is when the whole nation stands still for 72 hours with no stock movement until we can actually confirm where the disease is and what the potential spread was. So we mapped that out. And then out with the outcomes from each one of those, we tested that against our planning. And I might just pull up the CASP now because it played a critical role in making sure that we were actually hitting all the right areas and covering off. So the first one is very much around, this is the methodology that we used where we actually analysed where the stock was, what the existing preparedness initiatives were, what were some trigger points of concern, what our planning assumptions were, and then what our big questions were. So they're the sort of things. If you have a look at that, what are the synergies, risks, or gaps between biosecurity and emergency management, including legislation? How quickly can response arrangements be enacted? And if you go to the next slide, which is a blue map of Australia. So the next slide that you see, again, starts to look at what is our mission, what are the incident priorities, what are the response actions, what are the lines of effort, and then what's the most likely and most dangerous sort of threat effects or scenarios, and then what's the end state that we're actually aiming to do. So you can drop that slide off now if you like. So based on that, what we then did is matched our findings as we progressed and as we engaged with our crisis appreciation and strategic planning methodology. And then what we also did is out of the consultations, we covered that off. Then what we also did is that once we wrote the report, we got some of the critical stakeholders to actually review our findings, just to check if we had any gaps. Of course, lining them up with the terms of reference and expected outcomes. And we delivered it within the 4 weeks. We met every objective, and then the minister released it within 5 days of him receiving it.
So the reason we're here today is that one of the findings was about crisis communication. I wondered if you could talk about the conversation that led to that finding and the recommendation around employing crisis communications consultants to help out.
Yeah, thanks, Barb. A really important one. As we work through the scenarios, as we understood the impacts and consequences, and going back to the heuristic diagram, the other thing that was so critical is you literally go from zero, so as we are today, just having this dialogue, to catastrophic, right? So there's no lead time, there's no time to start discussing what's our comms strategy, there's no time to actually work through who's going to be the spokesperson. And I think there's a lot of threads out of this that can be applied in crisis management, across the board. So out of that, we started to have, there was a bit of work that was done, in terms of crisis comms. But when you think about the criticality of this in particular from an economic perspective, we're talking about an impact of $80 billion, right, on the Australian economy. And then that flows onto people's livelihoods, onto mental health, onto confidence in the biosecurity system. The other thing it also flows onto is food supply. And being that a significant protein source is meats, and in particular red meats. I mean, obviously there's chicken and there's fish and then there's a whole range of plant-based proteins. But in the main, our protein is meat-based. But the impacts on other grocery items, where people don't have the confidence that if they go and buy from the supermarkets, they might be contaminated. So comms is so critical. You can actually create more risk and have more impact than actually the event itself if you don't get comms right. And but the other thing I should have probably touched on as well, one of the other things that we also did around when we were sort of just testing to see if, whether we'd hit the mark, is engaging with industry across the board and making sure that that the communications was right, in particular with supermarkets, so that they could also be lined up with our communication strategy, because it's no good if the officials are saying, here's what we believe, and then the supermarkets are communicating something else. Well, then straight away you lose trust and confidence. So a couple of things that came out of that, and we might just put up the slide, if that's okay, which is national crisis communications can be strengthened by. So you can read that yourself. So basically, the communications framework, the NBCN is about National Biosecurity Communications and Engagement Network. So there was a framework that was all in place. But what we did find, what it did highlight, is that you needed to have pre-populated templates that actually had messages that all you had to do was fill out the very specific detail. So first of all, what are you going to communicate within the first hour when there's a case that's confirmed? Then what does that mean in 6 hours? What does that mean in 12 hours? What does it mean in 24 hours? 3 days out, and we said out to 7 days, and I'll explain why out to 7 days. Because things will change very, very quickly, like very quickly. So we believe that 7 days gives you enough time to be clear about what the situation is, actually start communicating, and then 7 days gives you time to refine your strategy. The other thing is to have an alignment and talking points with some technical data around, foot and mouth disease. If will not, if the food's been processed, well then it's you're unlikely. Well, you're not going to be contaminated. If you're buying food from the supermarket, other foods will not be contaminated. So there's actually a whole lot of key messages that needed to be aligned, that then supermarkets and other retailers and also other wholesalers can actually line up with those key messages. The other thing was making sure that you were clear around who the key spokespeople were going to be. And the spokespeople need to be, again, authoritative, be good communicators, and also have the skills to get the message across to make sure that we maintain confidence and trust in the system. Also, the other part of it was making sure that we were connected, and we also had meetings with Food Standards Australia and New Zealand to make sure that our collective messages would be aligned, and making sure that those messages could be packaged up so that they could be distributed when needed in relation to food safety. And the key message here, Barb, for me, was speed to action, speed to decisions, and speed to communicating with confidence so that the community knew exactly what was going on. The other thing was not only community, but stakeholders, farmers. The other thing was you go from zero to stock standstill, again, instantaneously. Now, that takes a little while to roll out, and that's for 72 hours, and then you start slowly easing that off. So you have to be able to communicate that very, very quickly to try to scope that, when the balloon has gone up, is incredibly complicated. And I'm sure that a lot of the communicators that are on this call would agree around the pressure and the challenges of getting messaging right and coordinating the messaging during that crisis period. So what we identified is that this needed to be done beforehand. So effectively you had a pack or a playbook with templates scripted that you could literally just fill in the detail and get that information out very, very quickly, or even at least start to sort of like refine it so that it's aligned to the risk and impacts and consequences that were actually occurring, because every single event is different. The other thing that we also learned, because one of the other things that we did to make sure that we covered off on all the aspects is looked internationally, in particular from the UK. And one of the things that came up was about social license. So you cannot assume that social license that exists around destruction of stock, disposal of carcasses, how you actually deal with the communications and food safety. You cannot assume that we have the same social license of 10 years ago today. So the other thing is understanding some of those aspects around what society does expect. And one of the learnings from the UK was that they were setting up pyres and burning the carcasses, and they found that the community literally rejected that and rebelled against it because there was constant smoke, the smell of the burning carcasses, and it just wasn't acceptable socially. And so therefore they had to change their strategy. So you need to have the communications right. It needs to be fast, but it needs to be accurate, and you need to have confidence in the messages, but importantly, the coordination and consistency of messaging is one of the most critical aspects. Because if you get officials running different messaging to then food safety standards, and different messaging to the supermarkets, and different messaging to the abattoirs, and different messaging from the farmers, you're going to end up in a world of hurt and a lot of challenge. So that was why this one was quite a significant one. So the recommendation was really around getting some experts in to develop that national crisis communications strategy and playbook. So really the playbook's, the manual that would have all the different stages, decision-making frameworks, pre-prepared content, in particular for the initial actions. And then, as I said, that set the timeframes of 1 hour, 6 hour, 12 hour, 24 hour, 3 days, and 7 days.
Okay, so 6 of the recommendations were around national planning and policies and procedures and that type of thing. How can you see communication being part of that as the recommendations are enacted?
So the communications cuts through every single one of those, Barb. It has to be, integrated in the policy setting, has to be integrated in the planning. In actual fact, the communicators need to be embedded as part of the planning. I always like to embed crisis comms people in our planning, because it's no good doing all the planning and then, basically going into a crisis comms person saying, oh, can you turn this into something that will make sense and actually, be put out to the public? And as I said, maintain public confidence, have consistency in messaging, be clear around the messaging is, and also not have a whole lot of, institutional jargon, which we all do, around, we've all got our own language in our own sectors. Well, the public don't understand that. So, so it has to be able to be communicated, and therefore the only way to get that with the consistency is make sure that comms is part of every single aspect.
Going to community engagement now, I'm just wondering, we'll look at industry engagement for this particular report. It plays a big part in the communication around potential outbreaks, but it doesn't feature in the recommendations or the findings. Why is that?
Well, it's actually embedded within it. The reason as well is, in particular in the biosecurity space, there's actually formal agreements about industry's role. And in actual fact, it's a shared costing model with industry as well. So industry actually nearly contribute, I won't call it an insurance scheme because it's not, but they contribute to planning, preparedness. There's actually an organisation that is funded, co-funded by the government and by industry to be prepared, and they actually they look after AusVet plan, which is the plan that would be activated to respond to this time. So that becomes really, really critical. But the other thing is that it actually cuts into other policy areas as well, and there's other stakeholders. And I touched on it Barb, around management of feral animals. And somebody's popped up. It's a partnership, not an insurance scheme. And hopefully, I qualified that by saying that was my sort of description of it, but it absolutely is a partnership. So just making sure that my reference to an insurance scheme, I use insurance scheme not in a financial sense, but more in a planning context. You know, a lot of our contingency arrangements and preparedness arrangements, from my perspective, are actually insurance, to make sure that we're prepared, that we've got contingency arrangements. So just to clarify that, in case that is misunderstood. So thanks for putting that up in the chat. So industry is embedded in that partnership, you know, as part of the arrangements. So any of the recommendations are not just targeted.
Joe's dropped out. While we're getting Joe back on, here he comes. Okay, we dropped you. You dropped out for a minute there, Joe. And we missed the bit from what you were talking about while you were doing something.
How's that? Can you hear me now, Barb?
Got you now. Yes.
Okay, we're back on. So yeah, so industry are already you know, as part of the partnerships. So the recommendations actually apply, you know, across every aspect, not just to government. All
right. I'm just wondering what, out of that process, the entire 4-week period and even your preparation for the review, what surprised you?
Look, in some ways, there was nothing that sort of really surprised me out of, you know, that I sort of was like, well, wow. What I thought was great, and again, I see that's clearly there's some sensitivities around insurance. I might have just addressed that one first because it leads into what surprised me. So just to be clear, thank you. I won't use insurance again. It was clear around the sensitivities of that and the partnership. And I'll just reiterate, because I know that this is being recorded, the language that I use for insurance is not around a financial system. It's and it is about a partnership around preparedness and a cost sharing arrangement. But what did surprise me, which was to me was a positive thing, is exactly that partnership between industry, land, you know, farmers, the whole sort of sector, and government to be prepared for this. So, you know, the equity elements of it. The other thing that also surprised me, and this is why comms is so important in biosecurity. If you go out too early, you can actually trigger the whole market and have negative impacts on the market for something that might not eventuate. So, you know, and this is what started to happen when all of the comms went out around, you know, foot and mouth disease, you know, encroaching, coming into barley, you know, encroaching on Australia. And just recently we had the lumpy skin scare, you know, again. And that was all about comms, because, you know, the testing found and validated that there is, you know, lumpy skin is not in Australia. So a really, really important one. The other one that did, and where I was actually going to go to, is management of feral animals, you know, across the country, but in particular up north. And in some ways, how we enhance our systems there so that we get early indicators if there are anything, if there's anything in some of those feral animal sort of stocks and herds. So that was something that sort of surprised me. But the other thing, which again was a positive one, is that the collaboration, like, you know, and as you said, Barb, 4 weeks is not a long time to do that sort of work and that sort of report, but we could actually do it because it, like, everybody just rolled up their sleeves and contributed because they could see the importance of it. So when you set a common objective,
which is really important, and you understand everybody's equities, then you know, it's amazing what you can do in such a short period of time. So that, you know, getting the collaboration, getting the input, understanding equities, then all of a sudden, you know, you end up with, you know, doing some pretty amazing things. As I said, we ran 3 national exercises in that 4-week period. Sometimes it takes 8 months just to prepare one national exercise, right? That's just the preparing for a 1-day exercise. We ran 3 of them in 4 weeks.
So what are the lessons for emergency management from that?
So, I actually thought I had the slide, but I don't have the emergency management slide up, but it is in the report. One of the most important lessons is the integration between biosecurity and the emergency management system, because you know, the biosecurity and all the people that operate within the biosecurity stream are well versed with what they need to do in a technical sense, but the consequences of this are so widespread. And very, very quickly, you know, what was identified is that we will run out of people to be able to actually, you know, deal with the enormity of this particular type of crisis. So the importance of being connected with the emergency management system, the importance of knowing how the systems will integrate. And if you have a look at the report, there is a diagram there. Looks a little bit complicated, but the reality is, you know, we operate in complex adaptive systems now. We're not in this hierarchical command and control model anymore. So for me, that's probably the most important one, but reinforcing the importance of comms regardless. You know, it needs to be integrated in the system and at every point, not just sort of at the end where you hand somebody, you know, sort of get this message right to be sent out. It doesn't work. So, you know, I found that there are a lot of lessons from this work that I've actually integrated into our national emergency management system.
Joe, I just wanted to go back to that partnerships concept. The relationship between biosecurity agencies and industry groups seems to be really tight, and they're really the envy of the rest of us. I'm wondering, can you see where the people in emergency management, operating in emergency management, might actually get to that point with industry and community, I guess, is the equivalent here for us?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think one of the differences with this, I think it's very, very clear around what the equities are, what the risks are, you know, and what the consequences are. In some of the broader emergency management areas, yeah, we can sort of scope it, but it depends on where it lands. You know, it depends on, you know, which community it hits or how many communities, and if you get consecutive concurrent ones. But saying that, Barb, we've actually already started to enhance the connection with industry, the private sector. One, we just ran a preparedness summit in Canberra over 2 days, and we had not-for-profits, private sector, emergency management agencies, government officials, critical infrastructure operators, all in the same room, all starting to understand, you know, what the potential impacts are, what the consequences are, and what the outlook for the season is. The other part is we've been running the National Coordination Mechanism for the last 3 years now. We've ran 544 of there, and that is a mechanism that brings the private sector right in the heart of decision making. So they are partners with equity in the problem and in the solution. And through the National Coordination Mechanism, we actually engage with them. We share responsibility with them. And it's incredible the power of that in terms of getting, you know, getting resolution to very complex problems in supply chains, or even understanding, you know, the interdependencies of different systems and different industries and different supply chains. And it's similar. So in the foot and mouth task force, we mapped where vehicles and how stock moves around the country and how quickly, you know, foot and mouth can spread unless you can identify it very, very quickly. The reality is, within 16 hours, if you don't pick up that there's stock that's infected, it will be spread halfway around the country. That's the sort of speed in which we're talking about. So that engagement with industry, we've taken a big step. The formality of the arrangements under biosecurity, again, are a little bit different. Took a lot of years to actually get that agreement. Took a lot of years to get the cost sharing model right. But, you know, some great work that has been done by a lot of people in that industry. There might be some areas we are looking at how we partner more formally with industry and with the private sector, but definitely something that we are enhancing. I'm not sure that we'll end up with something as rigorous and as detailed as those arrangements that you just described.
Yeah. Okay. One of the things that struck me was that there doesn't seem to be any media coverage of the report. Why was that?
Yeah. Well, it's sort of it's a interesting story. So as we said, we delivered the report within the 4 weeks. Handed it off to the minister. The minister approved it and released it within 5 days. The problem was the day that the report was released, sadly, the Queen died. That was the end of any interest in a foot and mouth and lumpy skin disease task force. We would all remember that. I think the media, it featured in the media for the next week. That's the reason why it didn't get the coverage. But it was in some ways a good news story in terms of not only the work of the task force, but the outcome, saying that the system is sound. We've got world-class biosecurity arrangements, in particular in the prevention. There are some areas that need to be improved, but in particular integrating biosecurity with mainstream emergency management. The other thing with that, Barb, which was an interesting outcome, is that every jurisdiction is doing exactly the same. They are all connecting into their mainstream emergency management arrangements. So each jurisdiction, and then we've done the same at the national level.
I'm just asking in the chat if anyone has any questions for Joe. Pipe up now, and I'll ask them. There's nothing yet, so what's the next thing? How long will the recommendations take to roll out, and what's the government's commitment been to the recommendations?
So, my role finished up once that the report was done, except there's the part about integrating with emergency management sort of rested with me and the Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry. So they've actually been implementing the recommendations. I know that they've definitely produced the playbook. So that recommendation has been picked up. The other recommendations are being worked through, and basically work through that. I can see that there is a question that comes up, Barb, if you wanted to.
Yeah, so to what extent did the task force look at existing relevant manuals like the AusVet plan, Biosecurity Incident Public Information Manual, etc., to inform the findings?
Yeah, absolutely. All of the above. We, if you had a look at the first, and if you read the report, it pretty much said that we would look at, existing structures, existing plans and existing manuals, because there was no way that we were interested in duplicating effort, making recommendations. It was more about enhancing. And that's why we came up with the main recommendation that the biosecurity arrangements are sound. However, through stress testing in particular scenarios and through our engagement, there was definitely scope for improvement. And also, there'd been a number of other number of other reviews that had been done on these arrangements, and we had a look at those and tracked through implementation of those recommendations, and that was also informed our recommendations. So I'm pretty confident that we covered most bases. of where there could be improvements, and they're doing a lot. Of work around implementing those, and that sits with the Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry. The other thing I should say, Barb, it was actually handy that my minister, as the Emergency Management Minister, is also the agricultural minister, Department of Ag. So he looks after agriculture, fisheries and forestry. So that was also a benefit, to be honest.
And, there's a question here about the frameworks that you used for stakeholder mapping. Was there a particular one that you employed?
I think it's called AEP. Somebody help me. There'll be somebody. I just can't remember it now, but it's a very common framework that is used for stakeholder mapping, and that's pretty much what was used.
Another question from Brian Wilson. Joe, what has been done to promote dual integration with our trading partners such as Indonesia and Timor-Leste?
Yeah, really good question. There's been a lot of work now. We specifically looked at the domestic preparedness capability, so very much so. We did engage with Indonesia on their arrangements, and one of the things that they are doing, in particular, Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry, regularly engaging with Indonesia, and there's a fair bit of investment going on both into Indonesia and Timor-Leste for the prevention, and detection part of it. So there is a lot of engagement with those two countries.
And follow up to that one, is there a danger that layered bureaucracy will dilute the report's advocacies? How can this be overcome, and would it be via industry oversight and reviews?
I think that was a self-answered question there. I think it actually is industry oversight. There is, there's significant equity and interest at both government level and also by industry. So I think that that should be the driver. I can't speak on behalf of DAF in relation to that, but I am meeting with the new secretary of DAF to speak to him about the review, about the report, and around its implementation. But it's not and I'm not saying this in terms of handing it off, but I was actually taken offline to do the task force. Those that have the responsibility for biosecurity are now implementing it, and which is the right way to go.
Okay. And a question from Sean Gibbons. Is there work to put a more streamlined crisis communication network in place across Australian government agencies? And I think she was talking about how DAF can tap into a comms network that's more formalised rather than just the list of media teams that they currently work with.
Well, I think that was part of the strategy. That was the intention of part of the strategy, was to streamline that and, basically to connect up the networks. And I think it's a really important point. Like I said, it's no good just having a list of, comms people. It's actually about having them engaged with the strategy, having them engaged, and also rehearsing, and doing scenario testing of it as well. Because, again, we all know this crises also run on relationships and networks, both formal and informal. So the formal structure sets the foundations, but really good relationships, and there's the old saying, you don't want to be handing over your business card in the middle of the crisis. You want to actually know the person, have worked with them, have trusted them. And I actually think that, scenario testing is probably, one of the best ways to do that. And it doesn't have to be overcomplicated. You could literally do a webinar like this with a scenario and go around, the group and just say, so what would you do now? Like, who are you? What do you do? What's your input? And you can do it fairly easily, and then you can go into the more sophisticated and challenging ones like we ran yesterday with 260 people all in a room with different interests, with multiple scenarios across Australia. But, you can do all of them concurrently.
Well, that looks like that's it for all the questions. So thank you so much for your time today, Joe. Oh, we have one more and we've got time for one. Joe's got to catch a flight, so we'll let him go early. In relation to Sian's question, in South Australia, our emergency management plan includes the structures of functional support groups, and the PIFSG, led by SA Police, is a cross-government comms and media group, which meets ahead of bushfire season, etc. Could or should something like that be established at federal level?
Well, it actually is. It's a similar sort of thing that happens there. We've got crisis comms people. They connect into federal departments, comms people, and then they connect directly into the crisis people in states and territories. It's linked into the National Situation Room, which sits within my portfolio. So that is the same system. They were, they've been sort of engaged. And another example is we briefed media outlets last Friday on the outlook, what the arrangements are. And part of that, it wasn't a press conference. It was actually briefing media so that they understood what the arrangements are and how we actually work together.
Great. Excellent. Nice note to end on. Thank you so much, Joe. Thank you all for attending today. For the October webinar, we have a Q&A session with the research team that did an in-depth investigation into the community experiences of the 2022 floods in Queensland and northern New South Wales. Now, the team gathered a massive amount of data, and the presentations so far have just touched on tiny bits of that. So what we're proposing to do for next month is to ask you all what you'd like to know from that research, and submit your questions so that researchers can come back to you having gone away and discovered, rediscovered what they've found about your particular question, and then they'll address that question in the webinar. So you'll get an email in the next week or so about that. You'll be asked to submit your questions early. They will take questions on the day. So I hope to see you all then. It looks like it'll be an amazing webinar with some really specialised and specific results for you all. So keep your pets and livestock healthy. We'll see you all next month.